Amazing. Lovely. So yeah, as I was saying, thank you very much for having me, and thank you all for being here. I'm very excited to share with you a bit of information on how to educate and empower yourself on COP26, and a bit about what my work is, what our work is, and how that all feeds through into climate policy, and specifically, obviously, the climate politics of the moment in COP26. But Climate Talk, just to kick it off, Climate Talk is an initiative led by students and recent graduates, essentially all people in their sort of early 20s, that aims to disseminate clear information about climate policy, and also to thereby increase the involvement of young people in the fight against the climate crisis. So this is a pretty short slide, so could I have my next one, please? We do this through a range of methods. Our primary vehicle, I suppose, is short 300 to 600 word articles, online events, and we're also in the process of creating a map of all the climate and environmental university courses that are available around the world today. I'll talk a bit more about our current and upcoming work later today, but as has been so wonderfully introduced, today I'm going to be talking about the IPCC and COP. We have specific articles about this on our website for more information on both of these topics if you want to explore some more after the session, but also, of course, later on I'll be talking about some more educational resources and research sort of resources for you that are available online. But could I have my next slide again in the meantime? Thank you. So a good place to start with understanding the IPCC reports, where we are now, and how all this figures in the upcoming COP26 negotiations is very simply to ask, what is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, also known as the IPCC? This might be very familiar territory to you already, or it might be an area that you're interested in but not confident on. I'm going to take you through sort of their work step by step, especially with reference to the recent scenarios and modelling on climate change, and hopefully you'll enjoy some benefit no matter sort of what your pre-existing level of knowledge is with this. But to take it back, the IPCC is a United Nations body that was established in 1988 by the World Meteorological Organization and the UN Environment Programme. And its central aim throughout all that time has been to provide policymakers with regular scientific assessments of man-made climate change, the socioeconomic risks of the crisis, and options to adapt or to mitigate against it. So the IPCC doesn't create its own research, but it does draw on the research from around the world through its author selection process. Its function is very much the sort of collection, collation, and synthesis of the best science that is currently available, and providing that in a palatable form for international policymakers and activists. So within the IPCC, there are 5 groups that work on their reports. And the purposes of these specific groups vary. Their work ranges from scientific evaluation to, particularly on climate and atmospheric change, to looking at like the human impacts of the climate crisis, particularly on cultures, on settlements. So it's got quite a broad remit for what it's looking at. But again, as I say, it all comes back to this kind of synthesis of relevant information on the climate crisis. So there are 3 kinds of reports which I've kind of visualized here, which are published by the IPCC. And the main of these are the assessment reports, which are produced by what's called the working groups. And it's the assessment reports that we'll be talking about a little bit later on. They are kind of these, perhaps some of the most standout reports produced by the IPCC. They're also referred to as the ARs. So when we talk about the ARs, we're referring to those assessment reports. And they are very long and they cite very many publications. They are hefty documents, but helpfully all of them have a summary for policymakers at the start, so an SPM, which outlines the key findings for each section of the report. Very useful if, like me, you are very interested in environmental policy, but not necessarily scientifically literate. The ARs are produced pretty regularly. There have been 5 published to date in 1990, 5 years later in 1995, 2002, 2007, and 2014. If you're interested in finding out more about the 2014 AR5, then we have an article on that about that on our website, dissecting it. But at the moment, all eyes are pretty much on AR6, which is expected to be finalised and published in 2022. So that'll be the 6th of those, as I say, those assessment reports, which are produced regularly and assess the current status of the science on climate change and where the IPCC scientists and researchers and authors believe the climate crisis is likely to go. And these reports are, crucial, partly because they are produced so regularly. So they provide this running commentary for policymakers on what scientists currently think the status of the climate crisis is. And they are used primarily in UNFCCC, so the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which I will talk about later. It's a horrible acronym. International negotiations on the climate crisis. And that the IPCC provides the science for those negotiations. And then there are 2 other kinds of reports, which I'll touch on briefly. And the next kind that I wanted to talk about are the special reports, which look at specific issues that members of the UNFCCC agree upon. The most high profile in recent years is probably the one about 1.5 degrees. And that was published in 2018, and it often forms the basis for those sort of carbon neutrality by 2050, carbon neutrality by 2100 targets that governments discuss. That's often with reference to the special report on heating to what will happen to the Earth, to the climate, if we allow heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But there are also other reports, that look at the ocean, the land, and renewable energy. They really are rich resources on these very particular topics that the IPCC dedicates a lot of attention to. And the last kind of IPCC report, just briefly, are the methodology reports. And these are usually produced by a task force, and they aim to help governments make greenhouse gas emission, GHG, as it were, inventories. So how to calculate GHG emissions and how a GHG might be removed from the atmosphere, like what are the sinks, what are the emitters. That's sort of the last type of report. But as I said, the AR6 and the assessment reports generally, that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on now. So could I have my next slide again, if that's all right, please? Looking at sort of where we are now then, as I say, with reference to where the IPCC's research has us at the moment, and where we are going into COP26, you will have no doubt seen the recent announcement by the UN that the IPCC's recent findings signal what I think it was the General Secretary called Code Red for humanity. And this was a response to the findings of one of the IPCC working groups, namely Working Group 1, which is the science-focused group which works on the assessment reports. And their findings were published in August of this year, which are intended and eventually will contribute to AR6, so the assessment report, which is coming out next year. This was essentially the scientific contribution to future AR6. And this report put the climate crisis in especially stark terms. Working Group 1 concluded that the Earth's climate will change in what they called unprecedented and irreversible ways in the next 20 years, with average temperatures likely to rise by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2040. So given that the IPCC special report in 2018 warned against the awful things which might happen to the Earth if we allow warming by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, and also given the fact that the Paris Climate Agreement of 2015 was centred on the intention to cap global heating at 1.5 degrees Celsius, these findings in August from Working Group 1 essentially suggested that efforts so far to limit global heating have failed, and that humanity is not going to make these self-made targets which we've made for ourselves. They produced, as part of their findings to contribute to AR6, they produced various scenarios, which I've kind of included some of the visualizations from on the slide here, about what will happen in various scenarios. If this amount of CO2 is released, if this amount of heating happens, what will happen to weather? And under every scenario that they visualized, heating, like global warming, is expected to continue to increase until the middle of the 21st century. They also concluded that looking at their scenarios on the potential outlook for where global temperatures are going to go, global warming of between 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius is looking likely to be exceeded at some point in the 21st century, looking incredibly likely to be exceeded, unless deep reductions in CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions occur in the coming decades. So, as I say, these possible scenarios were a way of considering what might happen if we allow this degree of heating to happen. What will happen to weather events? What will happen to, will it become sort of a positive feedback loop whereby heating accelerates as it goes up? And they generally found that, as you may expect, the impacts become amplified as the climate gets hotter, meaning that every further increment of global heating is more important than the last. So the difference between global warming by 1.5 degrees Celsius and 1.6 degrees Celsius becomes a significant change. The difference between global warming of 1.6 degrees Celsius and 1.7 degrees Celsius is even more significant, if that makes sense. Those increments become exponentially more important in terms of their actual impact on the weather and what will happen to the climate. So all of this modelling of the scenarios, which, as I say, found that global warming of more than 1.5 degrees Celsius looks to be almost inevitable at this stage without dramatic action. All of this research was sort of unsurprisingly perhaps combined with a call to action by Working Group 1, which essentially said, we need to act now, or the things that the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015 was intended to stop, the things that the special report of 2018 warned against if there's more than 1.5 degrees Celsius heating, all of those things will happen, and we won't have prevented what we've been trying to prevent without action now, really. Could I have my next slide? Thanks, Vega. So, positively, to some extent, many world leaders did respond to Working Group 1's reports with positive announcements of their commitment to climate change. Even politicians from traditionally more conservative parties or backgrounds. So Boris Johnson, the Conservative UK Prime Minister, described the report as a wake-up call for the world. And he said it was especially important before we meet in Glasgow in November for the critical COP26 summit. Very similarly, the special envoy to the US president, whose name is John Kerry, he's the special envoy on climate change, said that the report, in his words, underscores the overwhelming urgency of this moment. The world must come together before the ability to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius is out of reach. Glasgow must be a turning point in the crisis. So, as I was saying, this is where we find ourselves with COP26. As one of the leading IPCC authors put it, the recent report by Working Group 1 was probably the last report of the IPCC published while there is still enough time to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So, the assessment reports coming after AR6 next year and the Working Group findings published after last August are probably going to start coming too late almost to alert government in time to initiate action which will keep warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So in order to kind of achieve that, Working Group 1 said that global emissions essentially have to halve by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050. It's important to say, that a lot of this is quite stark and it's quite heavy. And I think that the IPCC is well aware of that, as should we be as climate activists. And the Working Group 1 report does acknowledge that it is possible to achieve 1.5 degrees of warming. It is possible to cap warming there, but we just need unprecedented action as soon as we can. So to this end, COP26 does become, as Boris Johnson, described it, a critical summit. As John Kerry described it, it does need to be a turning point of sorts. And to this end, there are various policies we can hope to see come out of COP26. So one thing we can hope for is more ambitious, so-called nationally determined contributions, which is essentially the amount of CO2 reduction each country announces that it is going to do itself. It's quite a strange metric. It's whereby countries commit themselves to reducing a certain amount of CO2 emissions. And we need those nationally determined contributions to be more ambitious now more than ever. Similarly, countries in the global north will need to commit to, and indeed begin delivering on, stronger financing of climate action in developing countries. There are various commitments that countries in the global north have made over the past few decades to sort of supporting move towards greener economies in developing countries and financing that, which they have essentially failed to deliver upon until very recently. But President Joe Biden has put forward more funding on it recently, and it is certainly an area in which we can hope to see some more financing, some more money going into it, and some more innovatory ideas at COP26. So to deploy a very common trope, we do stand at a very important moment in the climate crisis in 2021, and COP26 will be a very important COP. But that is not to say that COP27 the following year and COP28 the year after that will not also be landmark moments in the climate crisis. The next few years, as well as just this November, will be very important in terms of what government policies are made and also what we do as advocates ourselves. Could I have my next slide, if that's all right? It seems a very strange time to kind of include my follow us slide after talking about quite heavy environmental policy and environmental research. But nonetheless, this is just here to kind of close up that first section of what I was talking about, to start opening the floor to you guys and some more questions and things. But hopefully at this point, you have a sense of what the IPCC's messages are at the moment, how that internal research has been being produced, the role of things like Working Group 1. Because I know, if it weren't for my work with Climate Talk, if it weren't for my own sort of research, it sort of seems quite arbitrary when those reports come out. In August, when it was announced it was Code Red for Humanity, it kind of, without that background of knowing that it's part of the research which will then contribute to the assessment report, it just sort of seems like we're having sort of research and information produced for us all the time, and it's all sort of a bit overwhelming. So hopefully that enables you to kind of visualize a bit more where that research is coming from, what it's going to do, and why COP26 is such an opportune moment to address these issues. So yeah, that's where I'll leave it for the moment at this stage.
Thank you so much, Katrina. It's been a really interesting presentation, and thank you for giving us this science-based report and all of the insights that you have on it. So without further ado, I would like to give you the floor again for your second section, which will be about COP26 vocabulary and a series of resources, how to find resources, and how to basically educate yourself further if you wish to on COP26.
I suggest though, before we do go there, is there any questions that anyone has on the IPCC in itself? Because I think the next section will be slightly different. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or just somehow get our attention.
Yes, and of course, feel free to leave questions in the chat anytime you want. If you have, any idea, any doubt while the speaker is talking, we will take them into consideration after the presentation. Thank you so much, guys.
Great. It doesn't seem to be the case, Katrina. So yeah, please carry on with the next section, which is really to familiarize us with the vocabulary that is regularly being used when we talk about climate change negotiations, and basically, yeah, making it more easily understandable. I guess I will have to go back to your presentation, so I'll share the screen again. But yeah, do let me know when to move on with it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you, guys. And yeah, also, just to re-emphasize what they said about do put questions in the chat anytime. It always, whenever I'm on Zoom calls as a viewer, it always takes me quite a long time to digest what everyone has just said and then actually come up with any relevant questions. So do just, whenever they come to mind, do feel free to put them in. So yeah, I'm, as discussed, now going to talk a bit about vocabulary related to COP and climate negotiations, and also about kind of what resources are out there for educating yourself and doing your own research. I'm actually going to do this in a slightly backwards way, in that I'm going to talk about the educational resources which are out there, talk about what we do at Climate Talk, what other people are doing, and then in the sort of second part of my second presentation, as it were, then I'll sort of run through some vocabulary, some of which I've already been using today, and hopefully it will kind of provide any further clarity that's needed, some of which will be new terms entirely. Additionally, if there are any terms or ideas that you've come across, heard of, perhaps that you use yourself, but you're just not 100% confident on what these terms actually mean, do feel free to throw those in the chat whenever they come to mind as well, or indeed if I've said something which doesn't quite make sense, because as I say, you get the world of sort of climate policy language and linguistics you become very accustomed to, but it also can be very, very opaque until you've kind of broken that barrier, I suppose. But yes, anyway, for the moment, I'll talk about some climate education resources. There's some informal education resources available to you, which I thought I would start with Climate Talk, because obviously that's the organisation I'm from. That's the organisation whose work I know most about. And then I'll launch into some other similar organisations in just a moment. So as discussed, quite like YE, Climate Talk's mission is all about educating young people on climate policy. And as I mentioned previously, we'd approach this through two major strategies. Our primary approach is article writing, which vary from longer pieces, dissecting the role of particular events or pieces of legislation in climate policy, to current affairs articles, which sort of summarize recent events in climate policy in a digestible few paragraphs. So the most recent example of the latter was that I just finished a short piece on Climate Week NYC, and how this figures in international business negotiations ahead of COP26. Because climate policy is one of the most active arenas of policymaking, whether you're talking about the private or the public sector at the moment. And I do truly think that these kind of articles, whether they be long, whether they be short, are really crucial tools for being able to kind of stay up to date with what's happening, because we're all only human and have a lot of other things going on. So it's sort of having those other resources from which to learn about what's happening in climate policy can be really, really valuable. Additionally, we run events, which is often following up on important events in climate policy. Sometimes we sort of bring some of the stakeholders in. So, for example, we recently held a panel on the Virtual Island Summit, and we were speaking to experts on climate and sustainability policy for islands and oceans. And next week, we're holding a meet and greet with some young climate activists, talking about their involvement in climate policy via summits in particular, and how our attendees can look to get involved themselves. So as I say, much like the Youth Climate Hub today. It's all about your kind of empowerment and education and learning what you can do as an advocate or an activist yourselves. So yeah, I mean, ultimately the key to empowerment is education, and it's only through understanding this climate policy that we are able to advocate for our governments and our businesses and everyone else to start doing better. Could I have my next slide, please, Pega? Thanks. So this slide is actually incredibly small now we're on the Zoom, but I'll sort of run through the names of these organisations as well as I'm speaking. Because, you know, Climate Talk is one of a number of organisations and websites offering resources and support with which you can learn more about climate change policy, particularly as we approach COP26. Indeed, you are at one such event today already. So I'll take you on a short and, just to emphasise, by no means exhaustive tour of those resources now. But as I say, there is always going to be so much more out there. This is just a little snippet of what you can find. So I thought I would just start by saying, you know, if you're interested in the IPCC reports that I was discussing earlier today, I really would urge you to go and have a look at the summary for policymakers on the IPCC documents, which are available online. And these make the science involved in the IPCC decision-making and recommendations involved in those reports accessible to a non-specialist audience. I'm aware that some of you might have a scientific background, in which case, you know, go ahead and read the whole thing. You certainly have the capability to. But for those of you who don't have a scientific background, who are looking for that slightly easier introduction to what is the science going on here and how is it relevant to me as someone interested in environmental politics or advocacy or policy, this is a really, really good starting place. Would you scoot? Thank you. More than fine. So, you know, as I was saying, I was talking about how these sort of events are going, and these sort of resources are going to actually become more numerous as we approach COP26. You know, for example, we at Climate Talk are holding breakfast sessions, which are these virtual events in the morning, on the morning of days of COP, during which we kind of break down the developments which have happened so far. And to the same end, you know, we're holding a post-COP event. So some of these will involve appearances by negotiators from COP, youth climate activists, and also those who are unable to attend, but whose voices are still crucial for the development of climate change policy. So that's, for example, something that we're doing in light of COP26 approaching to help you stay up to date if you yourself are not there or you're trying to incorporate COP26 and its immediate developments into your own work or activism. Moving to other organisations and opportunities for climate education, Youth Climate Action are an excellent organisation for empowering users with information on the climate negotiations and tools for starting to get involved. I believe actually that Youth Climate Action are mentioned on one of the documents attached to the Trello for this event, because they are that good. They are, we all agree. They are really excellent for providing you with a platform to start working out how you can use your skills in the pursuit of advocacy on climate change. In a slightly different role, you have organisations like Carbon Brief, which is slightly more similar to Climate Talk in that it's about dissecting and demystifying climate policy and producing literature to help you do that. Though Carbon Brief has a closer focus on energy policy specifically, which I think is kind of implied by its name, but they produce data-driven articles to clarify the facts of and models surrounding climate change and explain the policy responses with which those are associated afterwards. Again, as a non-scientist myself, I very much like Carbon Brief for breaking down that science and providing me with the statistics and the data that I need as an activist, as someone involved in climate policy, without meaning I have to do the sort of too much of the legwork myself. So there's an example of that just on the right-hand side on this slide, where they have an in-depth Q&A on the report of the Working Group 1, which is what we were talking about earlier. That's the sort of Code Red for Humanity scenarios for AR6. And that Q&A, you know, it's very in-depth. It takes your intelligence seriously. You know, it doesn't talk down to you. It takes you seriously as someone who knows about climate policy, but nonetheless, it breaks it down and it makes it a lot more intuitive and a lot easier to understand. Another similar organisation is Covering Climate Now. And this is very much an organisation with an eye to journalism, supporting those who wish to integrate the climate into their reporting or to sort of recenter their focus onto environmental journalism. And it runs kind of courses associated with that core purpose. But personally, I think if you have any kind of professional or educational or sort of like as a hobby interest in writing, and you do a lot of writing or you do a lot of analysis, and you're kind of looking to integrate information on COP26 into your writing, as I say, whether that be as a journalist or whether that be just in your work, irrespective of what that is, I do think that Covering Climate Now is a really excellent resource. It also, for anyone not in any of those kind of roles as well, or those professions, Covering Climate Now also collates current stories on climate change. You know, it kind of collates journalism on the environment that it judges to be good, which, you know, I wouldn't use it as your only resource. I would certainly look around for your news sources more generally, but it is very much focused on empowering you to talk about the climate, to know about the climate, and to be able to write and communicate that yourself as an advocate or a communicator. And just finally on this slide, you know, the sustainability and environment education is my final organisation I thought I would highlight to you. Because I always, whenever I go on this website, I'm always quite impressed by what an array of information they really have. This is, again, you know, a collation of courses, websites and blogs, podcasts and reading. Is very significant, with which you can enrich your understanding of climate policy. So there is less specifically focused on COP and the UNFCCC, though there are, of course, resources relating to that and other aspects of international climate policy. Rather, this is sort of focused on giving you the tools to educate or empower yourself. I'm just reading the question. I'm sure that it will be more than fine to send you. I'm very happy for you to have the PowerPoint afterwards, and I'm sure we can talk to the others, but I'm sure that'll be more than fine. Could I have the next slide though, in the meantime? So just quickly, I mean, as I said, my list of resources was by no means exhaustive, and there are manifold learning opportunities online. As I say, especially as we approach COP26, there are so many organisations taking advantage of the present moment to produce educational resources on climate change. But I thought I would just include this very quickly. To say, you know, when looking at a website or attending an event, when researching climate on your own time, just be sure to ensure that what you're reading is, where possible, citing its sources, referenced, and is data driven. You know, it's a very, very common trope nowadays, but like there is as much misinformation online as there is information. So ensuring that your resources do these things can help ensure that you're using good quality information. That's not to say that an article can't also be excellent without being referenced. Many of the resources I've signposted you to don't necessarily always cite all of their sources, but it's just a good practice, I find, in terms of assessing how much you trust an organisation that you're reading from, and how much weight you should give to what they're saying. Cool, could I have my next slide again, please? So now, before you head out to explore the resources, before I kind of like send you on your way with my slides, as the other said, I thought it might be valuable, and indeed they thought it would be valuable, for me to kind of briefly cover some of the terms that we're used to hearing in these discussions. So we've talked about a couple of these already, such as the idea of those working groups which contribute to the assessment reports, the main of which at the moment has been Working Group 1, which produced that report in August 2021. And that's the science-focused working group. And also NDCs, nationally determined contributions, the amount that countries commit to reducing their CO2 emissions by to fulfill the goal of keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But there are, of course, many, many more. Here are a few of them. I've been talking today a lot about the UNFCCC, and I think earlier I very quickly mentioned that that's the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It is a mouthful, but aside from that, it is a treaty, or perhaps slightly more simply, it's just a document which is signed by 196 countries. So nearly all the countries in the world. It's a very thoroughly signed document, which aims to stabilise greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere by opening a dialogue between these countries. Sorry, I haven't written in my notes when it was signed, and I have a guess in my head, but I don't quite want to guess. I believe it was signed in the 90s. Yeah, cool. Then there's COP. Again, we've been talking about COP26, which is, COP is sort of just the abbreviation for the Conference of Parties, which serves as the annual meeting of the parties of the UNFCCC. So it's sort of meant to be the 1992, thank you, Peg. It's sort of meant to serve as the annual meeting of the people who signed up to the UNFCCC in 1992. It didn't take place last year due to COVID, but that was the exception. You know, we should expect COP to take place every year in some capacity. And this is where the progression of climate action is discussed and negotiations on the UNFCCC goals takes place. It is important that countries attend COP that have signed up to the UNFCCC. You know, I was reading earlier in the news that the Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, today suggested that he's not quite sure whether his country, whether he is going to go to COP. And I would just like to re-emphasize to you guys, you know, partly because it really frustrated me when I read it this morning, and I would like an outlet for that frustration, the huge importance that countries do attend COP. If, you know, governments are suggesting they're taking climate change seriously but aren't attending COP, then they aren't taking climate change seriously, because this is the stage for negotiation. This is the stage for collective action on climate change and bold decisions. Interestingly, as some of you may know, indeed some of you may be attending COP, it's not just governmental figures. There is a huge diversity of people and organisations that attend COP. There are kind of two sections to the actual organisation. There's the blue zone, where you need a permit to attend, the green zone, where kind of anyone can go along and meet. And as I say, environmental organisations from across the world will be attending. Again, very, very briefly, a sort of personal grievance of mine, but something for you guys to keep in mind when you're hearing people discuss COP, is the fact that this year it's likely to be slightly lopsided towards global north countries, to an even greater extent than it usually is, because of difficulties with like COVID-19 travel restrictions and vaccine access. So it's important to remember that there are people who should be attending COP who won't be able to. Especially about COP26, which is important for us to know as people discussing the event. And then just quickly, I've talked earlier about the Paris Agreement. That was signed by 191 of the 196 parties of the UNFCCC. And the agreement is based on the NDCs, basically, these domestic plans to address climate change and aim to limit global warming. You know, as I mentioned earlier, the Paris Agreement is focused on that 1.5 degrees Celsius goal, preventing global warming going beyond that. And that's kind of why it's such a buzzword. That's why Paris is such a kind of well-known factor in climate change negotiations. Moving on quickly from these landmark ideas, there are a whole host of acronyms like GHG emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and SDGs. The SDGs refers to the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN set. You've probably come across many of these in your own research and work, but there are endless acronyms in climate policy. Another one which I see sometimes in sort of the reading that I do is LTSs. Which are long-term strategies, often aimed at providing low greenhouse gas development strategies for countries in the global south by countries in the global south. if I could have my next slide just to sort of continue that discussion. Thank you. So yeah, I'm aware it's kind of 5 to 4 now, and there isn't time for me to explain all the words involving climate policy this afternoon. Also, I don't know enough to give you all the acronyms for every climate change acronym in the world. So I just wanted to quickly signpost you to this website, which is, as you can see, organised by the UN itself. And it's a comprehensive list of climate change acronyms and terms. It's not light reading. It might be more bedtime reading if you're looking for something to put you to sleep, because it is indeed a dictionary. But if you come across a term you don't understand in a text, then this is the place to go to search for the definition. As I say again, you know, glossaries are very rarely exhaustive, but this does a good job of coming as close to exhaustive as any other resource that I've seen. And again, that will be with the PowerPoint for you to kind of search for yourself. If you search United Nations Climate Change Glossary of Climate Change Acronyms and Terms, just the text on the screen, it will definitely come up. So if I could have my last slide again, please, Pega. Thank you. So as I was saying, you know, that's a rundown of the vocabulary and resources which might be valuable for you as at this stage as climate activists. Just to re-emphasize, you know, there's a huge wealth of material out there on the internet. And today I just wanted to signpost you to some of the informal education opportunities available online. And to give you some starting tools with which to understand those resources, and particularly that vocabulary we were just discussing. But yeah, that's kind of all from me. I just like to thank you again for listening to me speak for about 40 minutes. I really hope there was something of value for you all there. And it's been wonderful to talk about it. I very much enjoy it. So thank you again for listening to me.
Thank you so much. I think that now there is a general background both to the scientific and technical part, but also on how the COP26 process works. And I think that now we are ready to go through the priorities of COP26 and get a little bit of insight into priorities and the topics that will be discussed and what the UK presidency considers as to be most important in the Glasgow negotiations. In order to do so, we will use, this will be kind of a more interactive question, so we will use Slido. But before going to that section, I would like to thank you, Katrina, for being here for all this time and for giving us all of this information. And I don't know if you'd like to stay with us or you need to go, but if you need to go, thank you on behalf of YE, on behalf of the advocacy team, and we hope that you also enjoyed the session.
Yeah, I've had a wonderful time, thank you. I'll probably hang around for a few more minutes and then head off.
Thank you so much.
But again, if anyone has any, I know you're kind of moving into the next stage. If anyone has any questions, that's also obviously completely fine. But I'll hang around for a little bit longer. But thank you again.
Thank you. Maybe we have a question. Okay, perfect. Go on.
Thanks, and thank you very much, Katrina. There was a super nicely condensed background information, so thank you very much. You mentioned the expectedly unequal distribution of global North and South countries on the COP, and I actually read that CAN Europe, so the Climate Action Network, proposed or started a discussion about whether to postpone the conference again, or like to host it in a hybrid or only digital format. Have you, I'm just want to ask, have you heard anything about it? What's your opinion? Yeah.
Yeah, it's such, you know, I saw that from Can as well, and I think it's a difficult, I don't know, I think it's an impossible situation. I think it's a catch-22 because, you know, the working group 1, I think, as I mentioned earlier, the research they produced ahead of AR6 next year essentially said, you know, this is the last report or the last piece of research that we will produce before it is inevitable that warming more than 1.5 degrees Celsius will happen. So this is that's kind of why they published the research a bit early. You know, it's part of the reason why they the working group produces that research as they go, rather than just sort of that research being published at the same time as AR6 next year. All of that said, you know, but I think rather than all that said, what I mean is by that, I mean that it's important, I think, that COP26 does go ahead, because last year it wasn't as though COP26 didn't go ahead and there was still some degree of climate development, climate action. Of course, countries across the world were consumed by the COVID-19 pandemic, but it was, the updated commitments were not completed. Do you know what I mean? Like, there was really a gap where there should have been developments in climate policy. Again, all of that said, it's a recurring feature and has been throughout history that climate policy has been lopsided towards the global north. You know, in early negotiations in sort of the 70s and the 80s, where the idea of climate change was just starting to sort of gain traction, and there was discussions of slowing economic growth or different strategies for economic growth to reduce CO2 emissions, developing countries in the UN. I think in particular it was Brazil and India, but I am willing to be proven wrong if it wasn't those countries. But from my memory, they sort of said, well, you know, it's all very well for you guys to say, slow down your growth to save the planet, but like we need to grow more. We don't have the same standards of living as the countries in the global north. So there has always been this slight disconnect, I think, between global north and global south countries in climate negotiations, and that's only getting worse with the limited and lopsided access to COP26 this year. You know, as I say, I wrote an article on Climate Week NYC earlier this week. And again, it's very depressing. Like, it's lots of American, global north, Western companies and policymakers sitting in a Zoom call together or sitting in a room together and patting themselves on the back for like getting rid of plastic waste and banana packaging, you know? So it's not the real action that is needed, and indeed it is people in global south countries who will be worst affected. So by all that, I think, to summarize, I completely agree with you. I completely agree with Can as well, that it's a very difficult situation. It's a very difficult balance. I personally think that it is good that COP26 is going ahead, in that it's better than nothing. But I say that with a huge amount of internal sort of strife about it, I guess, because I completely agree with Can that like it is not right that is the case. I think probably what should have happened is the UK, I mean, what should have happened in the first instance is that vaccine availability shouldn't have been so swayed towards global north countries. If that was going to be the case, then the UK, as the organiser of COP26, said it was going to provide vaccines to delegations. It has not done so to the extent it should have. If vaccine availability was if it was going to be lopsided in sort of a world in which global north countries didn't share the vaccines as they should have, then I think the UK government should have made a more concerted effort to ensure that vaccine delegations from every country, or vaccine delegations, COP26 delegations, and indeed climate activists from every country had access to the vaccine. Because I will stop talking about this in just a second, but also the UK government also sort of has restrictions on which country vaccines are acceptable from as well. Which is a complete joke and also only makes the inequality in access to COP26 worse. So altogether, I think it's a kind of COP26 should be going ahead, but perhaps it should be, oh, Pega said there's an update on that. Thank you. I think it's good that COP26 is going ahead, but I think it's been mismanaged in the context of COVID-19 in terms of there should have been active and very intentional mitigation measures to keep equal access between global north and global south countries, or indeed just more equal than it is now. I'm aware I'm kind of just talked at you there, but do you have any other further thoughts on that or questions, or yeah?
Yeah, actually, because I'm taking a delegation to COP26, so all of these questions and all these points I had to actually personally clarify, because, for instance, I have a delegate coming from Russian Federation, and he's vaccinated, but the vaccination isn't approved by the UK government. So I was sort of stuck what to do. And basically from the feedback I got is that now they will allow even unvaccinated people who are registered in the delegation to come with no issues. So basically, if UK government doesn't accredit or doesn't, validate the vaccine you've had, or if you've not managed to do it, as long as you are in the delegates list, then that's totally fine. And you don't need to self-isolate. So they've sort of watered down their provisions for that. And basically, because you all will be in the green zone, then there is easier regulation. So you won't be interacting with a lot of localers as much, but they will keep a little bubble to basically protect everyone at the moment. So yeah, there is no issues if there is any problem on that, but it took a while, I have to say. 2 weeks before the meeting, they were telling me an entirely different thing, saying they are going to provide vaccinations. And then 2 weeks afterwards, when I asked the question, they said there is no problem if they're not vaccinated. So yeah, I think they are learning by doing, and that's very much confusing. And also in the Trello board, I've provided a link. Basically, there is a website that states how negotiation blocks are going to work. And it's really interesting for you to check it, because basically this year they've done it very differently. They will be negotiating in blocks where like small island developing states are together. And then they have like umbrella block, where I thought, okay, it's probably going to be about, NGOs, but actually it's not. It's the rich countries, and they will be in a block. I don't know what that means, but I think if you are really interested about the global North and South divide, you will find that block like grouping very weird. And I think it's something for us to discuss also in the second Youth Climate Hub, which is about advocacy and how will it work in COP26. So yeah, bring your thoughts in. I think that will be really interesting. Cool.
Well, thank you for filling the knowledge there. I really appreciate it.
No, don't worry. I think, to be honest, I wish I didn't have that need to have that knowledge, because to me it should be straightforward. And before we finish the meeting, I will share my screen and show you where everything is in the Trello board. So don't worry if now it doesn't make sense. I will make sure to do it before we leave altogether. Thank you so much for bringing that up, though. I didn't notice that I didn't do that. Now back to Anna.
Thank you so much, Pega, also for giving this live update on the delegation. I will be part of the delegation, and it's good to know. We will accept maybe another question if you have any. Otherwise, I will thank again our guest speaker, and I hope that we will meet soon. And yeah, I wish you a great rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys. And if anyone has any questions afterwards, I'm sure I'll leave you in very, very capable hands. You're also very welcome to, you have my name, you're very welcome to add me on LinkedIn if you want any more questions. But as I say, I'm leaving you in very good hands. So I'm sure you'll be fine. And thank you all very much for coming. It was lovely to be here. Have a lovely day. Bye.
Thank you, Katrina.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, guys, so I think it's time for our quiz and for our more deep diving into the COP26 priorities. This section will be interactive, as I was anticipating before. So we will use Slido, and we will soon share the link to the Slido. Pega, do you want me to manage the Slido, or?
No, I have it here with me.
Okay, perfect.
You can share the link.
Yes, I will share the link, and you can share your screen, and we are ready for the presentation then.
Oh my God, I am so bad at it. Yeah, I've got it. Okay, great. Can you see it?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So basically in this section, we wanted to do to introduce you the COP26 priorities, but please don't cheat, like don't Google it. We want it to be interactive. So try to guess. There is no like winning or losing. It will be about interactiveness. And basically, instead of just presenting to you the COP26 priorities, what do they mean? We actually wanted to put it in a let's say quiz format, so at least we can see how do you also define this section. Anna, I suggest that you have done it. So first thing first is, what are the priorities of the COP? Select up to 5 of the following subjects. Oh no, you saw it. You only saw it for a second. So basically, if you go to the link that is provided, you can see the options. I thought it was in the Slido already. So yeah, please go in, and once you start selecting it, you will see it on this main screen format. And pretend you didn't see the next slide.
Vega, sorry if I interrupt you, but did you start presenting? Did you press present on the Slido?
Okay, hold on a second.
If you want, I can do it with my screen.
Yes, please. Can you present it?
Okay, perfect. But you have to make me organize it.
Oh my God. Okay, wait.
Otherwise, you have to go back.
I hate
from the full screen mode.
Okay. Can I really reiterate?
Okay. Sure, no problem. Sorry, guys.
I did present, I think.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think it's a little bit tricky, actually.
Actually, I will make you the host. It's so much easier. You know how to do it. Go.
Perfect. Now, just a moment to go on the slides, and we are set. You know, without these technical problems, we wouldn't even learn properly. So we learn from our mistakes. That's perfect. Okay. Okay, can you see the screen? Bigger?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Is it presenting now?
I think, yes. So here should be something popping up.
It's funny because it worked like 10 minutes before we started. Go, do it.
Yeah. All right.
I'll let you know once it's come up in the app as well. So if you press on that link, it will take you to where you can put your answers in. And yes,
yay, we have it. So I think that now the poll is live, and you should be able to select the options on Slido. Just let us know if you can do it, if you have problems, and I will reshare the link in case you cannot access it.
Now we can't see the full screen. Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, I couldn't see you actually before, so I was trying to. Perfect.
Yeah. Don't share the active poll yet. You'll give it away.
The floor is yours, Pega, I believe.
Yes. So basically, this first question is, what are the priorities of this specific COP? Every host country basically gets to decide how they are going to host the COPs, and they all tend to differ from one another, which I guess this is also a discussion for us to decide, is that a good thing or not? This year, UK has chosen 5 topics as its priorities, or let's say aims. And basically, before we go through to the objectives, it's good for us to decide, to find out basically what are the 5 aims that they want to achieve within the 2-week program. So yeah, I won't give it away, because I think if I start talking, I will do a bit of a bloop. So yeah, once we fill that in, then we can go in depth about what exactly do each point mean. Anna, I suggest we share the active poll now, because there's 7 already. You basically press on the active poll on the top left. No, no, go back, go back, go back, go back, go back. No, no, wait. Press next. Yeah. And then go up. It says active poll. Yeah. Oh, it doesn't let us. Is it question and answer? Yeah. On the bottom left.
I think it doesn't really let you look at the answers from the participants, but perhaps I suggest that you say what the correct answers are, and
oh, that's so annoying.
I know why it's not. I don't know why it's not working. Maybe it's because there are many choices that you can make, and it's not showing the right one because there are many that are right. I don't know why it's not happening.
That would be really fun, but I will find your answer somewhere. Great. Can you go on to the next slide then, please? So basically, the correct answers are, pretend you didn't see it in the beginning anyway, is mitigation, adaptation, finance, and collaboration. Can you please go next? And basically how UK presidency has tried to define this is to place 4 overarching aims that it wants to focus on, as you have correctly figured that out. And in order to achieve all of these 4 aims, they have decided that negotiations needs to happen on all 4 of them. So an overarching, let's say, methodology. And they will create negotiations by providing a forum for international engagement and partnerships, i.e., it would be member states, and then another forum where civil society and business engagement can tap into the negotiation processes, which will feed into the 4 objectives. So yeah, that's it. I don't think there was any questions so far, so I suggest we move on to the second part of the quiz. Yeah, it's okay. You can do it. You can go. Yeah. So basically that X is me when we were trying to practice this. And the first question we have for you is, what does mitigation and adaptation in the climate change regime stand for? Please provide 2 answers, one for defining adaptation and one for mitigation. Again, don't cheat, because these answers can be very easily found, but it's just to, put in a couple of words. How would you define mitigation and adaptation? I will do that myself as well. If it doesn't work, do let me know, but it's a live poll, so it will come up as you submit it. Great. I think 7 is a justified number before, so we can read them out. So the first answer is reducing and preventing. That's totally right. The first mitigation is really about preventing future harm, whereas adaptation is about addressing the current ones and making sure that they don't get any further, they don't go any worse. Then there is another comment which says to make society more able to face consequences of global warming and to limit the global warming. That's completely correct. Then mitigation is preventing carbon emissions, and adaptation is knowing that all we can be right now is adjust ourselves in a better way. Absolutely spot on. And mitigation, how to mitigate and reduce greenhouse emissions. Adaptation, how to adapt to climate change, for instance, the rise in sea levels. Completely agree. But although I would say mitigation, rising sea level should go to mitigation rather than adaptation, because adaptation would probably mean changing the entire population to a new location. Mitigation is prevention by not emitting more greenhouse gases, and adaptation is about resilience and dealing with loss and damage. Absolutely spot on. So actually, I don't need to add any more. And to be honest, these are exactly how it is. And it shows that you haven't, gone on website. So I'm happy about it. And lastly, mitigation is trying to prevent climate change from getting worse, so lowering emissions. And adaptation is making existing climate change livable for humans and preventing damage. That's exactly spot on. Now, can you please go to the next slide, please? Exactly. Oh, no. Go back one. Yeah, exactly. Oh, why is it all coming together? It doesn't matter.
Vega, do you want me to go to next
No.
to the answer slide?
No, that's fine. The next one goes into the next question. So I think now it would be really good for me to just briefly open the floor and ask you, how do you think that young people can, impact mitigation and adaptation actions? And that is really, your inputs will really help us in feeding into our delegation to the COP26. So when they do go into the discussion tables, they would also take your responses into consideration. So feel free to type it on the chat function, or if you want to take the floor already, just raise your hand and I will give you the floor. Was my question clear? If there is there's no one that is burning to ask the question, then to answer the question, then I suggest we move on to the next one, because we have like 7 minutes left and we have another really interactive quiz for you. And actually, I hope that one works, because that one's really cool. Okay, now we'll move on to the next section or next priority, which is about finance. What does the term financing in the climate change regime stand for? And again, don't Google. I need to put it in bracket. I'm loving the answers. That's exactly it. But I think there's the term financing can be as broad and as, you know, limited as possible, because when it comes to let's say climate change, it's basically, financing is basically used as a way of breaking the disparity between member states who can afford to lead green economies, and in comparison to those who basically lack to have the technological developments in order to be climate neutral zones. So financing is a very broad, let's say, terminology that is being used. And I think there is one thing that if I could write a whole PhD on, is how financing works in the climate change regime, because in the past, let's say 40 or 50 years, it has changed definitions from all the way from Kyoto Protocol, where basically there was the emission trading, where states, you know, we're creating budget, or let's say making money out of trading emissions to each other, all the way to now where we are thinking locally, how can we make our economy sustainable, and also net zero. So next slide, please. So basically, the 4 goals of COP26 are defined in such manner. And when we're financing, it's really, COP26 is trying to focus on increasing access to public and private finance. And secondly, to ensure that in a lot of least economic developed countries, there will be access to 100 billion annual climate finance goal. However, there is a little bit of an issue already, because in the IPCC report, it has stated that the $100 billion annual climate finance goal is actually only going to be, let's say, providing forum for climate change mitigation and adaptation for only 8 years. And the question is, how are we going to achieve our 2050 goal if the $100 billion goal is only going to last us 8 years of sustainability? But I think I'll leave that question to you. And the last thing is about collaboration. So really working together to keep keeping the 1.5 degrees alive, and to really work with civil societies and businesses. Next, please. And here we are. I think what's really important for us to discuss is, you know, where do young people fit in here? And what role should they play in these priorities? I'm not going to ask you to answer that if you don't, but if you really want to, please do. The aim of our second Youth Climate Hub really is to address these 2 questions. So I suggest you to come, because we actually will have a lot of young people and young advisors to the Secretary General also joining us, which is Nathan, and he will basically be here to answer any questions related to advocacy efforts on climate mitigation. That's it, really. I'll give the floor back to Anna. If there are no questions, then I suggest we'll move on to the last section of our session.
Thank you so much, Vega. It was really fun for me, and I hope that the next part of this interactive workshop will work on the Slido. We have prepared a couple of questions for you, multiple choice questions, and I will activate the live poll right now. So stay tuned on the Slido event, and I hope it will work. Okay. So I activated the poll right now, and I will also share my screen. So in this way, we can actually see the questions all together and go through them. So don't complete it just yet. So we go through them together, at least the first couple of questions. Okay. So here we go. Yay.
Can we have the link again, Anna?
Yes, sure, of course.
Oh, actually, I can just scan it with my phone.
And it's also in the chat, so you can find it in the general chat. So I will see if everyone is okay. I think we are a reasonable number of people joining. Okay, great. So I will start the quiz and I will go with the first question. So the quiz is basically who said it, and you will find a series of quotes from different people that could be celebrities or politicians, member of the United Nations. So you will have to choose the right person who said it. And the first one is, countries must take responsibility for the destruction that we are inflicting, not just upon our planet, but ourselves. So it's time for humanity to grow up. So let's see who gets it. How much time should we give, Pega?
So 6 out of 8 of us have submitted. So as soon as 8 is 8 out of 8, then we're ready to go.
Perfect.
Actually, we can show the result here. Yeah. No, down here. No, next to it. Next to it. Yeah.
Here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ah, we all got it.
Okay. Perfect. So apparently maybe the news was a very fresh one and also a very popular one. Okay,
No, I think
great job, guys.
I think we all just very much can predict what that guy can say, you know?
Perfect. Okay, next question. Okay, here it is. You see? Okay, so the second question is, we need all major economies to take the responsibility and to turn their transition into an opportunity for all. Let us set together a new global benchmark for climate neutrality. So you have a couple of seconds, minutes, 2 minutes. Almost there. Okay, I see we have an undecided person, but I think we can proceed now. Let's see. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Good job.
Well, I'm gonna.
Can you kindly mute yourself, Edward? Yeah, perfect.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Because we are also running late, quite late. So this is a fun question, actually. Think about the sentence. So a crime has been committed, and so it happens that I'm of such an age that I was able to see it beginning. I will let you choose. Okay, I see you're quite reactive. Okay, so I will go through. Ha! Amazing.
You.
Okay, this was a tricky question, and of course I tried to give you like a very tricky set of people, but yes, so basically the right question is Sir David Attenborough, and for those of you who don't know that, he will be people's advocate at COP26, so we hope to see him there in Glasgow.
But honestly, though, I see why people put Queen Elizabeth, because she's older than him. Surely she would have said that. But yeah, he's been very humble about his age, I guess.
Okay, third question. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? How dare you, Pega, to put this question in? I'm joking.
I mean, it has to be like, I will need to sometimes state the obvious, you know?
Okay, let's go. All right. Yeah, congratulations. Let's go on. This is already the fifth question. We anticipated from 2060 to 2050 the goal of achieving climate neutrality. Human and financial resources destined to the strengthening of environmental agencies were doubled, with a view to eliminating illegal deforestation. Who said it? So I didn't include the titles of these people, but let us know if you don't know them. They're all, of course, important leaders, very important leaders. Brazil, France, and
oh my God,
of course Angela Merkel. Not what?
You paused for that one. I was like, she doesn't know Angela Merkel?
Okay. Okay, so I see that this might be tricky. So the right question, the right answer is Jair Bolsonaro, president of Brazil. And let's see what happens at COP26. And as you know, this country has been really devastated by illegal deforestation, and there are so many issues linked to them. And of course, climate change is one of the main issues linked to deforestation. Okay, we are almost to the end. This sentence is, we can't afford a world so divided in its response to climate change when the evidence for compelling action is so strong.
You know, even though I set the question up, I'm even convinced by the choices here.
I was gonna say it actually. Okay, honest thing, I don't remember who said it, so let's see. Okay, here we go. Oh, now I remember. Yes. So of course you were probably better than me, 38%, okay. UN Secretary General, okay, I understand why you might make this mistake. But yeah, it's John Kerry. So last question. Last sentence is, so connect with people, visibly and loudly showcase initiatives that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, nurture your youth leaders, or spread the message by raising awareness. Your contributions will ensure that climate change solutions safely power your future. To the votes. Okay, let's see who voted. Okay, that's actually the right one, so congratulations. I think that I wanted to, leave you with this last question, because it is about youth, and it is also kind of an encouragement to youth to continue working and to continue advocating for raising ambitions and to, raising leaders' ambitions on climate mitigation targets, as well as, of course, adaptation measures and finance. So this was the quiz. I hope that you enjoyed it. I think that now we can see the final results, right, Pega? I think that, yay, okay.
That's not fair, to be honest. Take me out of it.
Okay, so congratulations, Anonymous. We don't know who you are, but if you're listening to us, just congratulations to you. And if you want to introduce yourself to everyone and say, I'm the one, just you can say something in the chat. And I will now stop sharing my screen. Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you so much, guys, for being here until now. And I'm sorry if we were a little bit late, but I hope that you had fun. And of course, there will be a couple of minutes for you to ask questions about anything that we talked about, and we will try to reply to everything. But if you have any other questions, in the future, also by looking at the presentation that we will share soon, of course, feel free to send us an email to by replying to the emails that we sent you already many times, and contacting us at my email address that, to be sure, I will send you here. Okay, so I think it's time for us to go, I'm afraid, but thank you so much. And I will just quickly skim through the messages. Okay, to make sure that there are no other questions. Thank you so much, guys, and I hope we will see you in the next workshop. As Pega was anticipating, it will be very exciting because we will have many youth representatives that have experience in COP before. We will have Nathan among us, who is now participating to pre-COP. So it will be a very exciting moment for everyone. So I wish you all a great rest of the day, and let's keep in touch.